Okay, thank you very much. So what I'd like to do for almost the next hour, I guess, is share some data with you from various surveys that I do. So not only am I the chief methodologist for Agile and Lean at IBM, and in that role, what I do is I help organizations around the world to understand what this Agile stuff is all about and to, more importantly, to scale it. And what I find is that when I work with people, particularly when I'm working with senior executives, they want numbers, they want actual answers, they don't want rhetoric. And so as a result, one of the things that I do as a columnist at Dr. Dobbs' Journal and on my own as well, I run industry-level surveys. So today I'm going to share real data with you of what's going on as opposed to, and then we're going to sort of test some of the rhetoric that we might hear. So my strategy for this presentation is fairly basic. I'm combining the Family Feud, and for those of you, who are old enough, you'll recognize that is the real person behind the Family Feud. And if you don't recognize who that is, you're just too damn young. So we'll give you although then again too, if you don't recognize who the fellows are on the other side, you're probably too damn old. So I just insulted the entire audience, so I'm good to go now. So anyways. So it's Family Feud meets Mythbusters, and I actually got to do a little bit of work with the Mythbusters guys about a year and a half ago, and wonderful, wonderful people. They do great work around the world. They do a great show, and then they also work with schools, particularly around North America, but also around the world, helping kids to understand science. And I think one of the attraction of this show to kids, and including myself, is that they get to blow things up. So it's a wonderful show if you ever get to see it. So I'm going to use some survey results to blow up some of your misconceptions that you might have around Agile development. And so I was the fellow who brought the prop with me. I don't know if you recognize this or not, but this is a 1 to 50 replica of the world famous Agile BS shovel. I was going to bring my replica of the Scrum BS shovel with me, but it was too big to fit through those double doors. So, ooh, cheap shot. Okay. Wow, it's early in the morning. You guys are a hard audience. So anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these surveys. So first of all, the surveys, I do open research. And I challenge anybody else doing any research to also be open as well. So all the data that I do, so I run the surveys. I then share the original survey questions as they were asked are shared online free of charge. The original data is also shared, without identifying information. So I don't share the emails and stuff like that due to privacy reasons. But other than that, all the information is shared online. So you do not have to trust me in any way, and please don't trust me. Don't trust me in any way, shape, or form. Think for yourself. Okay, so you can look into this all by yourself and look into it. And also some summary slide decks. So all the slides that I'm going to show you, cleaner versions of them are available online. You can download them free of charge, and lots of people do. My ISP is actually unhappy with me because of the amount of downloads I get from that site. But anyways, that will teach them to sign a contract. So a long-term contract. So to heck with them. So anyways, and for all when I do show the slides in a second, the source of the survey is there, so you can hunt down the actual data if you want to. I should also ask, so feel free to tweet. Lee was talking about tweeting a few minutes ago, so feel free if you want to tweet. Scott W. Ambler is my address. So please copy me in if you do tweet, because it's always interesting to see how people actually understand what I just said. And what I would ask people to do, though, is please wait until the slide is fully displayed. So once we go through a couple of missed slides, you'll see my scheme for displaying the information. I gave this talk a couple months ago at another conference, and some of the tweets that were going out at the beginning where people weren't understanding what was going on. So and the message was actually completely, they tweeted the exact opposite message because they didn't wait for the slide to display. So anyways, have a bit of patience. So let's get into it. So a couple warnings first. I'm going to blast information at you. There's going to be a lot of ideas, and I'm just going to hammer you because there's a lot of misconceptions out there, so I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground in about 45 minutes. So please, so I apologize for that, I guess. And you might hear things from me that you aren't hearing in some of the other talks throughout the week. So I would suggest that you might want to start challenging some of the speakers, start thinking for yourself, because the problem is that some of my good friends in the Agile community don't often have a blatant shovel with them, and they've got virtual shovels, and they're not as clear about it as they could be. But anyways, we'll share some data and we'll see what happens. Oh, and by the way, hopefully I'll be able to convince you that if you ever see emails from me asking, so roughly once a month I run one of these surveys now, so if you ever see an email on one of the forums from me saying, asking you to please take 5 entire minutes of your valuable time to fill out a survey, please do so. Because I think you're going to see we get phenomenally valuable information that can actually help us make real coherent decisions based on reality, not based on religious fervor. So please take the opportunity to share with us what you're actually doing in an anonymous manner. So it's a pretty good thing. So a few of the myths I'm going to explore, are we actually modeling? Are we documenting? Are people actually adopting Agile? Have we crossed the chasm? That's a fairly interesting question to ask. Is the Scrum certification stuff, is that respectable? That was a recent survey there, and we'll see some answers there. Are people claiming to be Agile, are they actually Agile? Uh-oh. Now there's an uncomfortable question to be asking, so we'll see, we'll see what happens on that one. So anyways, we hear this myth, everybody's doing Agile now. Although it's interesting that so many new people are here, maybe not everybody's doing Agile, but what can you do? So the majority of organizations are now doing Agile. This is a wonderful myth. And sure enough, in survey after survey after survey, now this is not one of the first surveys, but in 2008, it appeared that the majority of organizations were doing Agile. A little over a year ago, even more people were doing Agile. Now I'm just about to rerun this survey again, and I highly suspect we'll be in the low 80s now, although I'm just guessing on that one, so that's a little bit of theory. But I think this myth is confirmed. So survey says without a doubt. So easy kill on that one. But just because a lot of organizations claim to be doing Agile, is the majority of teams doing Agile? I think this is an interesting question because sure, so IBM, for example, if we have one Agile project underway, we're in this situation. Yeah, IBM's doing Agile, right? So, well, yeah, it's an organization of 400,000 people. Are we only taking credit for what a team of 10 is doing? Well, who knows, right? No, it's not true. But anyways, a lot more than 10 people are doing Agile. But it's an interesting question. So survey says, yes. In the July 2009 survey, 76% of respondents, and so this was going to the I should have said this. This is going to the Dr. Dobbs readership on this survey. And so with the Dr. Dobbs ones, Dr. Dobbs has a very wide readership. And it's interesting, the readership, from what I can tell, actually leans towards traditional still. So it's a very senior readership. Very bright people seem to be reading that magazine. But they lean towards traditional. But the reality is they have a wide range of readership. So all the way from very traditional to very lean and agile and everything in between. They have people who are hacking. So very, very wide range of readership. So as a result, I'm able to actually, it's one of the few sources of information where we can actually start comparing paradigms. So in this case, this traditional leaning group of folks, 76% of them indicated that they were doing one or more projects in some sort of agile manner in their organization. At least they believed that. And then on average, 44% of the projects teams within those organizations were doing agile in some way. So almost the majority of projects within the organizations doing agile were now doing agile in some way. Now, or at least so they claimed. So we'll see that this claim might not actually be true in a bit. Okay, so it's plausible. Now, I'm just about to go after, like I said, I'm just about to go after this data again because I highly suspect that 44%, we're so close, chances are pretty good we've moved over to the halfway mark. So chances are reasonably good that the majority of teams are, in fact, doing Agile now, or at least believe they're doing Agile. Could be a different story. So here's the question that seems to have gathered the most interest in the last month or so. So about a month ago, I started a survey around Scrum certification. And I actually did one in late July, early August, and all the Scrum people just whined and complained I was the son of Satan for having the nerve to question whether the viability of the Scrum certification, and the evil bastard that I am. I was biased, and yeah, maybe that survey was biased. So I didn't actually, that was the only survey I ever not published because I knew I was going to rerun it again. So, is Scrum certification, is it respectable to be a certified Scrum Master? I think this is an interesting question to ask. So survey says, maybe not. So what we did, so one of the questions in that survey We asked the certified Scrum Masters themselves. Okay? Let's not worry about what other people think of CSMs. Let's ask the question, what do CSMs think about being a CSM? Because I think that is obviously that's a biased group of folks, but it's a positive bias towards CSM. So I want to be as generous as possible to the Scrum folks. I want to make it as easy as possible for Scrum to succeed, or Scrum certification to succeed, and apparently it doesn't. People are embarrassed to admit that they're a certified Scrum Master. And so think about this. To become a certified Scrum Master, you sit in on either a 2 or a 3-day course, and as long as your check doesn't bounce, and as long as you don't fall asleep, congratulations, you're now a certified Scrum Master. And yeah, you've got to take for a while there, they were forcing you to take a test, which is now this optional online thing. It doesn't matter if you pass or not, apparently. But for the most part, it's not that difficult to become a certified Scrum Master. And I'm sure the training is great. It depends on the instructor, of course. But the training, I'm sure, is wonderful. But people are embarrassed. And think about this. So, and I don't mean to embarrass people in the audience, but several people so far at this conference I run into them. They say, "Hi, my name is John Smith, and I'm a certified Scrum Master." How sad. Here's this very smart, intelligent professional, and the most exciting thing in his career is that he attended a 2-day course. How sad for that person, right? It's not, "Hi, my name is John Smith, I'm the father of 3. Hi, my name is John Smith, I work on a really big, cool project. Hi, my name is John Smith, and the product I work on saved my company $500 million last year. Hi, my name is John Smith, I build software that saves people's lives." No, it's, "Hi, my name is John Smith, I'm a certified Scrum Master." How sad. If you remember Saturday Night Live about 10 years ago, and Molly Shannon, it's, "Hi, my name is Molly Shannon, I'm a certified Scrum Master." Superstar, right? Okay, nobody remembers that. Only for the young people. But there's a very serious challenge here. So anyways, apparently the certified Scrum Masters, for the most part, are embarrassed to admit the fact that they're certified Scrum Masters. So I got to think this is busted. They don't even respect themselves, so why should anybody else? So the message here for the community, we can do better. We really can. You'd be hard-pressed to find a certification in any industry that is a bigger scam. I think we can do better. Particularly, we're a community that talks about respect constantly. We certainly don't respect ourselves, let alone the people we're working with when we're doing these sorts of things. And to put the certified Scrum Master stuff into perspective, for the people that took the 2-day Scrum certification course, or even the 3-day certification course, to become a Starbucks barista, you have to get 24 hours of training. So in the advanced Scrum Master training classes, it's at the level of a barista. Good job. Good job. Anyways, moving on. So one of the things, so everybody said, okay, so perhaps this is a scam, right? So one of the ways that we excuse this, or the people that are running it excuse this, is that, well, no, we're not fooling anybody, right? This is what they say. We're not fooling anybody. The people that are doing the hiring at these companies, clearly they know that the CSM is meaningless. So we're not really hurting anybody. This is not a bad thing. Well, okay, that's a myth, right? Let's explore that one. So do the hiring managers actually understand what it means to be a CSM? Survey says, apparently not. Busted, right? So less than half of the hiring, so respondents in this survey, and you've got to think that this is a fairly biased survey because I very clearly called it the Scrum Certification Survey. So, and there was a few Scrum folks obviously jumping in there. I knocked out all the answers from the Scrum certified trainers, by the way, because obviously, they're slinging their message. So, for this answer, we cut their answers out. But for the non-CSTs, they said that within their organizations, only 39% of the hiring managers understood what it meant to be a CSM. So it's fairly clearly not true. Some of the stuff that's being claimed out there. So damage is being caused. So I think we need to start questioning these sorts of things. So let's just up the ante on this one. We've also heard, so moving on, So we've also heard that Agile is only for small teams, right? You know, if you're not a small co-located team, you couldn't possibly do Agile. I hear this at customers all the time. Regardless of all the facts around them, Agile is only for small teams. Survey says, apparently not. So in the State of the Union survey that we ran, so the State of the Survey Union from November 2009, it was focused on scaling Agile. So we're going to see a lot of data coming from that. And the one on the bottom is a little bit older data, so let's just ignore that for now. But still similar results. But the way this question was worded in the November 2009 survey was I asked the question, in your organization, what Agile team sizes have you been successful at? Okay, and so we saw people reporting, you know, so the way you read this is 1% of the respondents, obviously not a lot, but 1% of the respondents said that their organization had been successful with an Agile program, I guess in this case, of over 500 people. Now, the majority of people are still reporting that, you know, most of the teams are 10 people or less, which is actually the majority of project teams. This is also true of traditional as well. The majority of teams are actually quite small. But the interesting thing is that people are reporting success at a range of Agile team sizes up to very big ones. So I thought that this was very interesting. So now, just because other people are succeeding at this size of team doesn't mean that you will. Your mileage may vary. But somebody out there is. So when somebody tells you that, no, you can't do Agile in a large team, answer's not true. Somebody is, in fact, succeeding at that. So we need to start, you know, observing these sorts of things. So anyways, this myth is also busted, I would argue. We've also heard that Agile doesn't apply in regulatory situations. Sure, Agile is great when there's no rules, but, you know, if you're in a Sarbanes-Oxley, you know, we're special. We have Sarbanes-Oxley regulations to conform to. I'm sorry, any idiot can conform to SOX. It's almost trivial. But you know, FDA, okay, you know, those regulations, they become interesting. So anyways, are we in fact succeeding at Agile? And sure enough, this is from a couple surveys. So this is one, the one on the bottom here is the Ambisoft surveys. They're ones that go directly against the Agile community. So those ones are potentially biased because we're just going after Agile data. But what was interesting in that survey, about a year ago now, 1/3 of the people who responded to that survey in the Agile community indicated that they were currently on a team where one or more regulations applied. So 1/3 of Agilists are in a regulatory environment. In the November survey from 2009, which is the Dr. Dobbs one, what we found was that, so I asked, the question was worded a bit differently, but what I asked was, so I gave a laundry list of potential regulations and got beat up because I missed a few of the major ones, but that's okay. And I asked, so have you seen an Agile team succeed in that environment? Succeed where HIPAA regulations applied, succeed where FDA regulations applied, succeed where Sarbanes-Oxley applied. And sure enough, as you can see, well, okay, SOX is up there. As you can see, sure enough, some people are in fact reporting success with Agile in regulatory environments. So yes, it is possible. Because this only asks, are you in a regulatory environment? But they could have all failed, right? We didn't know that. So I figured I'd better ask about successful teams. So anyways, it's busted, without a doubt. So we are in fact succeeding in those environments too. Good news. Okay, so here we are in religion land now. Agile and CMMI. Okay, heresy. I swore. I apologize for swearing. I said CMMI. I'll use a few more swear words a little bit later on, like governance, unified process, things like that. So anyways, Agile and CMMI, are they working together? Yes, they are. So survey says, once again, people are reporting success. At 9% of the teams are reporting success, or 9% of the respondents are reporting success in CMMI. In that survey, 9% also said, well, in this one, they said they were in a CMMI environment. What was interesting was, I'm a firm believer in giving the CMMI crowd a hard time, actually. And so about 2 years ago, I ran a survey that was going after a bunch of the various process frameworks, CMMI being one of them. And what we found was that there was no statistical difference between the success rates of agile CMMI teams and agile and then CMMI teams that were not agile. No. It's between CMMI and non-CMMI agile projects. So CMMI had no effect on your success rate whatsoever for agile. It also had no statistical effect for traditional projects either, which I thought was interesting. Most of the studies that show that CMMI is a good thing, I have no doubt that organizations improve things applying CMMI. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. But what's interesting is that it's phenomenally difficult to get data comparing CMMI project teams with equivalent project teams that have their act together. Because most of the research that shows that CMMI is a good idea always compares it against the different levels, right? So moving from level 1 to level 2 is a good idea. Moving from level 2 to level 3 is a good idea. So yeah, comparing teams that are a complete disaster, completely out of control, with teams that have a little bit of their act together, I would expect some improvement from that, right? It's not going to hurt. So, and sure enough, the research seems to show that. So, this myth is also busted. Most of the myths get busted here, by the way. Depends on how you word the myths. Okay, we also hear, so if you read the Agile books, and this is true of non-Agile books as well, so I shouldn't beat the Agile community up on this one, but if you read the Agile books, almost all the examples are always greenfield development. We're starting a brand new project on a brand new platform. We're always using really cool technology, Ruby on Rails or whatever Scala, whatever they want to write about this year. And it's always a brand new thing, easy thing. Isn't that wonderful? I've seen one project where it's actually truly greenfield. Other than that, I'm always working with legacy. So, survey says, 4 out of 5 Agile teams are working with legacy systems or legacy data in some way. Now, this is an interesting result, which I've actually gotten a couple times now from others. A DDJ survey also came up with this sort of a level, where only 45% of Agile teams were working with legacy data. So for all the, I wish I had my shovel. For all the Agile BS around quality, how the heck are these teams doing a quality job when less than half of them are using the existing corporate data? Because the vast majority of applications that I run into are working with data around entities that they already have data for in their existing corporate database. And yes, it's challenging at best to work with your data management folks sometimes. But if you're creating yet another customer database, yet another inventory database or whatever, if you're creating yet another silo database, congratulations, you have just decreased the quality of the data in your organization. Shame on you. You know better than that. That number should have been 90 to 95% at least. So we have a very significant challenge in this community on that. I didn't go through I didn't get a chance to do an analysis of the guideline for the conference. But usually in most Agile in the Agile 2010 conference, there was only 2 or 3 talks out of the dozens of talks, over 100 talks I believe at that conference. Only 2 or 3 of them focused on data stuff. That's just shameful. We can do a lot better. So anyways, this myth is also busted. We need to start having coherent discussions. Now, there's a few good books on this. Michael Feathers wrote a really good book, Working with Legacy Code. I co-authored a book on refactoring databases, so working with legacy data, basically. But we need to do better. The reality is the vast majority of us work with legacy stuff. The stuff we talk about, the stuff that the speakers communicate, the stuff that the speakers write about needs to reflect this reality. We need to up our game. We also heard this myth that most Agile teams are co-located. I really wish I had my shovel on this one. Because all the books... Oh, thanks, Lee. Okay. I got my shovel now. Almost have my shovel now. Thank you, sir. Okay. Okay, so... We keep hearing about... In all the... everybody... and being co-located is a phenomenally good idea. Don't get me wrong. I'm a firm believer in this. But... Are the majority of teams actually co-located? Well, survey says, once again, busted. Less than half of response, and this, once again, this is an Ambisoft survey, so that's going directly against you folks, the Agile community itself.
less than half of the people are indicating that they're currently working on a co-located team. Now, some of them are working in cubes in the same building, all that good sort of stuff. They're in different buildings, different cities, all those sorts of things. But less than half of Agile teams are co-located, indicating the majority of Agile teams are distributed in some manner. So should we not be discussing distributed Agile development a bit more than we actually do? Because the more distributed you are, the greater the risk that you take on, the lower your success rate, the higher your costs, and the longer it generally takes. Distribution brings a lot of risk into the Agile into projects in general. And this is true regardless of paradigm, by the way. And we'll compare that in a few minutes. We've also heard that Agile teams work in short iterations. Maybe I should put this away now. Survey says, without a doubt. So it's interesting. 2 or 3 years ago, the average iteration length was a little over 3 weeks. Now it's gone down to a little over 2 weeks. So the inexperienced Agile teams, on average, now your mileage may vary, have an iteration length of average iteration length of 2.6 weeks. The experienced Agile teams, at least the ones claiming to be experienced, have an iteration length on average of 2.3 weeks. So my conjecture is that as you get better at Agile, as you get more experience with Agile, you have a tendency to squeeze down the iteration length. And this actually matches a lot of the rhetoric of what we hear from the Agilists. So it's nice to actually see that sort of a trend occur. So anyways, I thought that I was happy to see that. Because a lot of people do it. I prefer either a 1 or 2 week iteration myself. So, but it depends on your situation. So please don't quote me on that. But anyways, or please don't take that advice blindly, I should say. So this is good to see. Here's another myth. Agilists don't provide upfront estimates. In what alternate universe could this possibly be true? I'm a firm believer in Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica and zombie movies. It was interesting when Lee put up one of the slides about eating with the Agile speakers. I actually first of all I heard eat an Agile speaker. So I thought, oh man, this is like the Walking Dead show that's currently on AMC. This is pretty cool. But no, it was had to eat with an Agile speaker. So anyways, what can you do? There's no cannibalism at this conference. I don't want to imply anything. Please don't deploy your lawyers. So anyways, so there's this myth that Agilists don't provide upfront estimates. Well, survey says, of course they provide upfront estimates. How the heck do you get project funding if you haven't at least indicated somehow, yeah, we think it's roughly $1 million, and yeah, we think it's going to be 7 people for 3 years, or whatever the estimates are, right? If you don't give basic, fundamental answers to basic budgeting questions, hopefully in a big range and all that good sort of stuff, you're not going to get funding. The world just doesn't work this way. So without a doubt, we'll see some more stats in a few minutes, more recent, but the vast majority of Agile teams are in fact giving some sort of upfront estimate. Shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Okay, I'm going to swear again. I apologize. There is a myth that Agile teams do not work in a serial manner, and serial is in fact a swear word in the Agile community. Many of us will use the term rhythm. We don't work in a serial manner, but we do have rhythms, right? Once again, I'll get the shovel out. So here's the Scrum. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Scrum life cycle. Isn't that wonderful? Take your 2-day course, get certified. Good for you. Superstars, right? Okay, so anyways, in the real world, so survey says, we are in fact doing a little bit of upfront work. In the Scrum, my good friends in the Scrum community will refer to this as Sprint 0, or Iteration 0. Other people refer to it as Iteration 0, Inception, Initiation, Warm-up. We have lots of terms for this concept. But on average, we spend almost 4 weeks doing this warm-up stuff at the beginning of the project. In the recent survey that literally stopped on Friday, the Agile State of the Art survey, two-thirds of teams have said they were doing upfront estimating, and they also said on average they were doing a little over 4.5 weeks of transition time to release a system into production. That was the experienced Agile teams, by the way. On average, 4.5 weeks to release. So the reality is that we do a little bit of upfront work to get our act together to get going, we do some development work, and we do some transition work to release. Now, some Agile teams were actually reporting less than an hour to release. So I assume they had automated things and good things were happening there. But the fact is, on average, 4.5 weeks to do release. So we're not serial, so let's go for the rate. We'll make fun of the people doing the rhetoric now. We're not serial, but we in fact do sprint 0, then we do construction, and then we do the hardening sprint, right? That's the rhetoric. But it's not serial, even though we do these things in order. That's not serial, that's a rhythm. That's a rhythm. All right. So anyways, all joking aside, this myth is clearly busted. Could we please have coherent discussions around life cycles in this community? It's been 10 years. I give you permission to be honest. We've also heard a myth that Agilists follow common development guidelines. This is actually built right into extreme programming, the coding standards practice. It's built into Agile modeling, the modeling guidelines practice. So there's several of the Agile methodologies have this built right in, and this is a good idea. Following common coding conventions and UI conventions and data conventions, these are all very good ideas. Are we doing them? Survey says, maybe. So the way you read this chart is that the good news is that 30% of Agilists are following project team level conventions. 19% have enterprise conventions. This is what they should really be doing, right? So in your company, you should have a common set of Java coding conventions. It shouldn't be my project team's Java coding conventions and his team's Java coding conventions, right? That's not efficient. It's not good for sharing people across teams, not good for sharing code, not good for maintainability, certainly not good for the effort you put into developing conventions. So almost half had reasonable convention following stuff, but there were still a few that weren't doing it or were sort of thinking they're hoping to do it, but they weren't doing it, type stuff. So there's gaping holes here, and this is on programming conventions. It gets even worse for database conventions because we have an object relational mapping layer. We don't need to worry about the database design because we have an object. We're using Hibernate, therefore we can be brain dead in the way we approach the database, right? And UI guidelines. The one thing that's really healthy about the Agile community is we're seeing an upswing in the user experience folks getting involved. This is a very good thing. So this has been a healthy thing for us for several years. But it's disappointing the level of teams that seem to be following UI guidelines. So we got some challenges here. We have this myth. There's many talks on this one. Agilists, testing often and early. Survey says, you bet. I think this is an easy kill. Obviously, we're doing a lot of testing, although it's interesting. So this is from now this is a little bit old, so I apologize for that. I'm going to rerun this survey soon too. Now this was going against the test-driven development community on Yahoo groups. And so what was interesting, so for all the rhetoric around TDD, in that community, a lot of them were doing developer TDD. Not as many were doing acceptance TDD, but they were still doing other forms of testing, like just doing regression testing. They're still doing a lot of them were doing reviews and inspections. A lot of them were doing testing at the end of the life cycle. Something's going on during that 4.6 weeks during the transition phase, right? So there's a bunch of evidence that a wide range of testing is occurring. So that's pretty good stuff. We've also heard that Agilists don't do upfront requirements modeling. Survey says, So I'll go back on that one. So what we're finding here, so on the project initiation survey, once again coming from the Agile community, 3/4 of them were doing upfront requirements modeling. Because if you got to answer basic questions like what are you going to do, how much is it going to cost, all that good sort of stuff, you got to have a handle on the requirements. It's as simple as that, right? Now I'm not saying go off and create a big detailed phone book of requirements, but I am saying you're doing some sort of requirements modeling at the beginning. That stack of requirements that we see in the life cycle, in the life cycles, that just doesn't magically appear. It doesn't beam down from the Starship Enterprise. Somebody's actually got to do some initial modeling to initiate the product backlog. It comes from somewhere, right? There's no magic. It's not a science fiction show, right? So anyways, it is in fact happening. This is straight from the Agile community. This one's from the tester and development community. So what was interesting here, now this is 2 years old, so maybe things have changed a bit, but for all the rhetoric that we hear around tester and development, and this is in the TDD community, so these numbers are biased towards testing. So for all the rhetoric around TDD, and I'm a firm believer in TDD, even the test-driven development folks were more likely to capture the requirements using Microsoft Word than they were to capture them as tests. I thought that was interesting. And to be fair, doing acceptance test-driven development is a very difficult thing. So there's a, and the tools could be a bit better. So anyways, it's not surprising that was the case. But in this case, we are in fact very clearly doing some sort of upfront requirements modeling. Upfront architecture, exact same sort of stuff. Of course we are. We don't, having this rhetoric around, where's my shovel? We have the courage to worry about tomorrow's problem tomorrow. What a phenomenally stupid thing to do. Right? Let's just not worry about anything. Let's just blindly go off into the woods, and then I have the courage that my agile BS shovel will help me to fight off the bear in the woods, right? Yeah, not exactly the brightest thing to do. So the reality is, and sure enough, people aren't blindly doing that. What they are doing is they're doing a little bit of modeling up front to get going in the right direction. Let's go for a walk along the trail as opposed to a walk in the swamp where the alligators are. Right? We'll make some coherent decisions at the very beginning and get going on the right path, or what we believe to be the right path. That doesn't mean you need to over-architect everything, create a big sketch, go off into fantasy land and create detailed models, build frameworks, all the rhetoric that we hear from the XP folks. But it does mean you need to do a little bit of thinking. So architecture is in fact an important aspect of Agile, and it is in fact being done, and some of it's being done up front. But evolutionary architecture means you do a little bit of thinking up front, and then the details evolve over time. Think a little, do a little, think a little, do a little, and so on. Sure enough, once again from the TDD folks, in this case, capturing detailed designs was the most popular thing in tests, but they're still doing whiteboard. So the TDD folks, the hardcore Agile folks, are still doing whiteboard sketches, creating documents, good stuff like that. So something's going on there. So this is a busted myth as well. We don't write interim documentation at all. I've heard this myth. Survey says, So here's an example of one interim document, a project vision or a charter or a shared vision, like some sort of document at the beginning of the project describing what your goals are and what you're going to do. A little over half of Agilists, once again, it's an Ambisoft survey, so it's going directly against the Agile community. A little over half of people responded, yes, they do in fact create some sort of a document at the beginning of the project to capture what they're going to do. Capture their basic plan, all that good sort of stuff. So this one's confirmed. All depends on how you write them. Okay, we don't write supporting documentation. I hear this in organizations. I'm not hearing this as much anymore, but I used to hear this a lot in organizations. That, one of the excuses for not doing Agile is always, well, Agile is really good for all those other people, but we need documentation, therefore we can't do Agile. Survey says, Agilists are just as likely to write documentation as the traditionalists. Okay. Now, what was interesting? So the particularly on the lists, right? Because there's always these flame wars in the discussion forums. It was interesting. Before I ran this survey, the flame wars from the traditional folks were always, well, the Agilist people are there. They worship Satan and they don't write documentation, right? So then, literally within about 2 weeks of publishing this, the conversation then turned over to, well, the Agilists worship Satan, but the documentation that they write is crap. Right? It was interesting to see how that conversation just flipped as soon as I could hammer them with some data. So hammering them with data worked once, maybe it would work again. So anyway, so we heard from the traditionalists, a wonderful group of people who know what they're talking about, that Agilists don't write, the documentation that Agilists write is crap. Okay, fine, survey says. Okay, yeah, that's maybe. What was interesting, and this is the weirdest chart that I've got. It took me about 5 minutes and when I charted it, it took me about 5 minutes to understand what happened, because it's the only chart I've ever had that points to the left. And so the way you read this is that the documentation being created by the Agilists and the Traditionalists are actually dead on. So, well, they're statistically the same, because they're actually the same, and they're equally crappy. Right? Nobody's doing a good job with documentation. The people, the hackers following no process at all, not surprisingly, are struggling with documentation. And what was interesting, now this is just barely statistically significant, the iterative folks, the people following RUP or something like that, were doing slightly less crappy than the Agilists. So I thought that was interesting. So anyways, there's significant room for improvement when it comes to documentation, regardless of your paradigm. But please don't let the traditionalists claim that that they are doing a better job than the Agilists. On average, they are clearly not. It's the exact same. We've also heard that it's more difficult. One of the reasons why we justify documentation is, well, how would you bring somebody onto an Agile team if there's not a mound of documentation to dump on them on their very first day of joining the team, right? Let's bore the hell out of it. If the person can stay awake reading this crap, we'll keep them on the team, right? That usually seems to be the strategy in most organizations, right? If you cannot slice your wrists by the end of the week, we'll let you stay on the team. So anyways, what's the story here? Well, once again, a semi-strange thing, but what was interesting was that, and statistically, it was slightly easier to bring people onto iterative and Agile teams than it was onto a traditional team, and even than it was onto a hacker team. So I thought that was sort of neat. And the reason, because we're more collaborative, we work together closely, we talk more, all that good sort of stuff, and as a result, it's easier for people to come up to speed. So if you're worried about onboarding people onto your teams, at least onto your Agile teams, don't be. I'd be a little more worried about onboarding onto your traditional teams. But anyways, that's just me. So, that one's busted too. We've also heard this work that, We've heard that Agile works better than traditional. This is the way we justify it. Now, it's interesting. Some of the people in the Agile community talk a lot about empiricism. I would invite them to look that word up in the dictionary. That's just me. I own a dictionary, and I open it up every so often. There's even electronic copies now that you can buy. I hear. That was like what happened there? Advanced technology. Okay, so we've heard that Agile works better than traditional approaches, and we constantly shoot our mouths off about this. Is it true? Survey says. Yeah, it is. I was jerking you around. Okay. But what's interesting, though, if you were to compare, the amount of rhetoric on this issue to the difference in success rates, hard to justify. Now, so there's data from a few charts here, or from a few surveys here. So let's look at the 2008 one, because that's actually where the more interesting data is, even though it's a bit worse. So in 2008, the average Agile team had had an average success rate of 70%, compared to 66% for traditional. Statistically, barely better than traditional. How do you explain that? Now, and that was the closest it's ever been, by the way. Now, luckily, I got phenomenally lucky on this survey, because in this one, we decided to look at the various success criteria. Otherwise, we'd have a very difficult story right now. And what we found is that when you look, so this is on a scale of -10 to +10, this chart over here. When it came to comparing Agile and traditional in terms of quality delivered, the Agilists were doing better. When it came to comparing them based on stakeholder satisfaction, on people's willingness to use what was produced, Agile was doing better. When it came to return on investment, Agile was doing better. And when it came to able to deliver in a timely manner, Agile was doing better. That's good news. So why are the success rates so clear? So here's a theory for you. My guess is that the expectations for traditional teams are much lower than what we see for Agile teams, and this is why we're seeing comparable success rates. It's the only explanation I've got, because once you start digging down into the details, traditional gets its clock cleaned. On average. Your mileage may vary. On average, traditional gets its clock cleaned. In 2010, so this survey ran a couple months ago, so what was interesting, so I'm constantly being compared to the Chaos report. Because the Chaos folks, who make money selling us, for $5,000, you can buy a document from them telling us how much we suck, right? So they've been telling us about the software crisis now for 15 some odd years, since the mid-90s. I can't quite remember how long it is, but it's been a long time. So we've sucked for a long time now, according to them. And they claim that our success rate is 31, I think the latest number is 31%. It's always in the low 30s. So roughly 1/3 of teams succeed. The rest, well, they're not succeeding, according to them. Well, I'm claiming roughly 2/3 succeed. How the heck could that be? That's a big difference. That's a big difference. Well, they're not judging the success rate. What they're doing is they're asking you, are you relatively on time, relatively on budget, relatively to scope? And yes, roughly only 1/3. Now I believe, okay, I'll give them credit. Maybe 1/3 of teams are pulling that off. Seems high, but maybe 1/3 are. There's a lot of lying going on, by the way, in that sort of, but we won't go there. Future interesting column on that one. So anyways, they're not measuring the success rate. They're measuring on time, on budget to spec. And they assume that that's the way we define success. Well, when you show people respect, and instead of ramming it down their throats, as the chaos folks have been doing for 15 years, and instead show them people respect and say, so how do you define success on your project? You find out that very few people define success, when given the choice, define success in terms of on time, on budget to spec. Now, many business people will ask for that because they expect no better of us. We've never given them options, so they don't take them. But when given the choice, very few people actually want on time, on budget to spec. They might want combinations of some of those things, but they don't want all three. So we can work smarter. So what we need to do when we ask people how successful they are, we have to let them define success in their own terms if we want an accurate success rate. Because your team has different success criteria than my team, and rightfully so. And that's the way your success will be judged. That's the way my success will be judged. So anyway, in 2010, we changed the survey up a bit because the Standish guys, they report, are you successful, are you challenged, or have you failed? So they have 3 numbers. So they're sort of muddying the waters on this one a bit. So I figured, what the heck? So maybe that was the reason why, right? Maybe because I was measuring something different, I was getting different results. So I decided to measure in a similar sort of way, well, it's the same sort of thing. So what I found, though, which was interesting, was that when you define, so challenge was defined in as one or maybe 2 success criteria you didn't quite make it on. Okay, so you came close, you still delivered, you came close, but you blew it on at least 1 success criteria. So when you did that, we found that Agile teams are 61% successful compared to 52% for traditional, and 29% were challenged compared to 41% for traditional. So I thought that was sort of interesting. So Agile is still smoking traditional, and so doing the Standish group thing, the results are even better. So anyways, this is good news for the Agile folks. Confirmed. We've also heard some of the rhetoric. So, sorry, swearing once again. Unified process. We've heard that Agile is better than the unified process. Obviously, this has to be true because anybody doing the unified process does, in fact, worship Satan. So, is this true? Multiple surveys say, statistically, same success rates. The only success criteria that there is a statistical difference on between Agile and iterative was return on investment, where Agile did a little bit better, which is good news. Otherwise, statistically, same success rates. And I've been doing surveys more than just 2008, 2010, but in all of the surveys where we ever compared success rates by paradigm, Agile and iterative always had statistically the same success rate. So perhaps the success of Agile teams is mostly from the fact that we're working in an iterative and evolutionary manner and not all the rest of the rhetoric. Well, the rest of the rhetoric seems to be helping a bit, but not anywhere near as much as the rhetoric seems to lead us to believe. That's something called empiricism, as opposed to rhetoric. Okay, so anyways, we've also heard that maybe traditional works better for large teams, right? Because I'm sure, I run into this situation a lot now. Sure, Agile is good for small teams and good for co-located teams, but we've got a large team, therefore Agile is going to suck, right? Survey says, Agile is better or as good as traditional regardless of team size. Everybody's sort of bad at large teams. Well, ad hoc is really bad. What was interesting, though, which we don't hear a lot about from the traditional community, not a lot of research on this for some reason, ad hoc teams, so following no process at all, if you're a small team, is better for you than following a traditional waterfall process. So yes, and the majority of teams, as I said earlier, are 10 or less people. So in most organizations that are still doing traditional, they are reducing their success rate by following a traditional waterfall life cycle because most of their teams will be small. Thanks for tying that anchor around our necks. So that one's busted. How about distributed teams? There's an interesting question. Survey says, busted. Once again, Agile is equal to, at a very distributed team, Agile is still equal. Now that's an indication we really don't have a clue how to do distributed development. But when it comes, but when you're close together, Agile's better. When you're far apart, Agile's doing the same. I would suggest you need to throw some better tools and better processes at that and raise your success rates up. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody where they're asking about distributed Agile development. How do you kick off an Agile team that's distributed? Put people on airplanes. Get them talking together at the very beginning. This is the exact same advice for a traditional team as well. Put those people on airplanes. The cheapest way to pay for travel on a distributed project team is to have people travel. The most expensive way to do it is to be stupid, let your accountants make decisions, and don't let people travel. Make it as hard as possible for them to share information and communicate with each other. And if you really want to screw yourself up, write a detailed specification. That is a wonderful way to kill the project. And there's wonderful statistics out there on that one, regardless of how distributed you are. So anyways, traditional is not looking so good. I'm soon going to get data on regulatory environments as well, because I highly suspect traditional is no darn good for regulatory environments either. That's just a guess. I'm willing to put money on it. I am putting money. It costs money to run these surveys. Okay, so just to wrap things up, here's a myth. This is a nasty myth. There's this myth. Where's my shovel? This is like on Star Trek, right? Remember that episode? Like if there was like a big ball on the end of this. Remember like on Star Trek, the original series where Spock got a hard-on and they had to fly to Vulcan and kill Captain Kirk? Remember that episode? Yeah, no. You guys are tough. Anyways, it's Florida. We're too far south. The hard-on jokes don't work here. Hey, he should have got Viagra or something. If they only had space Viagra, it would have been okay. We wouldn't have had that problem. Okay, so anyways, teams claiming to be Agile. Now, one of the very serious problems in the Agile community is we're not good at defining things. There's no definition of Agile. We point to the manifesto, that's the definition. No, that's a set of philosophies. It's not a definition. Sorry. Open up a dictionary and look what definitions look like. And we don't have criteria for judging if teams Agile. So this is brutal. So this is the criteria that I've been using for years now to smoke out the hacker teams. So the teams that are claiming to be Agile who aren't. So I just want, so anyways. So using this criteria in a survey, so the things I look for, are you producing value on a regular basis? Are you at least doing regression testing, if not test-driven development? Are you working with your stakeholders on a regular basis, or at least a stakeholder proxy like a product owner, regardless of the rhetoric around that role? Are you self-organizing? We hear a lot of rhetoric around that one. Are you improving on a regular basis? Are you doing reflections and retrospectives, all that good sort of stuff? So survey says, it's plausible that the people who are claiming to be Agile are in fact Agile. The good news is that for most of the criteria, the interesting thing, the improvement thing has no effect on the success rate there. That's a suspicion I've had for a couple of years now, and it seemed to hold true in that survey. But anyways, weird statistic detail. What was killing us, though, what seems to be killing people, is self-organization. The existing corporate culture is screwing you. The project management offices are screwing you. The PMPs, screwing you. They are preventing you from being successful because they don't want to change. I see this in organization after organization after organization. And I'm sorry if I'm going to beat up the pimps out there. My wife is a pimp. But sorry, right? Very serious problem in this industry. We need to step up. We need to say, we have to be self-organizing to succeed. Get out of our way. Let us succeed. And if we don't do that, we're not going to have much of a gap between traditional and Agile. And we are, in fact, regardless of the expectation theory, we're not seeing a huge gap in the success rate, and we should. And the reason why is half of those teams that were claiming to be Agile probably weren't. Very serious problem. We can do better. So anyways, thank you very much. So some parting thoughts. Think for yourself. There seems to be a significant difference in some cases between the reality and the rhetoric out there. We need to observe things. We need to do more studies. We need alliances that actually that actually support research. The Agile Alliance does. Other alliances that I know of claim to, but then don't. Where are the numbers? Next time we hear about empiricism out of somebody, where are the numbers? These Agile methodologies, the empirical ones, have been around for over 15 years, and they're considering all the rhetoric around empiricism. There is a very serious lack of numbers on that one. So let's start thinking about that. We can do better. We struggle to communicate what we actually do. We do modeling all the time. We do architecture. We do requirements. We do all these good things. And yet there's too many people that still are confused. Do Agilists model? These myths are only prevalent because of the lack of communication, regardless of all the claims we have around communication. So anyways, like I said, if you ever get asked to fill out a survey, please do so. Please do so. We get good information on. I go into organizations all the time where I run into people who are presenting, and they'll be using my slides, which you can download for free, to help them justify Agile and to help them explain what's going on. So please do this. You can use these slides if you want to. If you are designing a survey, I highly suggest people will go out there and gather their own information and share it with everybody else. I've got some good information on how to design surveys, and there's actually a mailing list you can join if you want to get feedback and help designing it and all that good sort of stuff. So there's a good community around Agile survey taking if you choose to leverage that. Anyways, thank you very much. Feel free to contact me if you want. Like Lee was saying, the Agilists are in fact very open. I'm happy to get emails. I'm happy to get tweets and all that good sort of stuff. Drop by my blog if you want to. Feel free to put comments against it if you want. That's all good stuff too. Anyways, thank you very much. Excuse my Star Trek jokes. Thank you.